All right, let's jump right in. We're going to uncover an invisible resource that you're probably interacting with right now. It's in the clothes on your back, the box at your door. It is absolutely essential. And, believe it or not, it's at the center of a huge and growing global squeeze.
So think about this for a second. What could your favorite t-shirt, a roll of toilet paper, and even the tires on your car possibly have in common? It sounds like a riddle, right? Well, the answer is probably not what you're expecting.
The answer is cellulose. And if you're thinking, what on earth is that? Well, it's only the single most abundant organic polymer on the entire planet. It's the stuff that makes plants stand up straight. It's the structural backbone of wood and fibers. It is, and I mean this literally, everywhere, just hidden in plain sight.
But here's the thing. Even though it's everywhere, this incredible abundance is facing a challenge like never before. And that brings us to the real heart of our story today, what we're calling the unseen cellulose squeeze.
So you might be asking, where is all this pressure coming from? Well, it's a double whammy, really. On one side, you've got the classic demand. Paper, cardboard, the usual suspects. But then, and this is the ironic part, our big push to be green is creating a brand new wave of demand as we look to replace plastics with wood-based materials for, well, pretty much everything.
Okay, so let's break this down because this is where it gets really interesting. Pulp and paper are still the biggest slice of the pie, sure, at 45%. But look at this. 30% goes into textiles, things like viscose and lyocell, fueling the fashion industry. And another 15% is essential for our food and pharmaceuticals. Yeah, this is way more than just paper. All right, so we've got this explosion in demand from all these different industries, which leads to the obvious next question. Who is using all this stuff? I mean, to really get a grip on this squeeze, you have to follow the appetite.
And, when you look at the data, the story becomes crystal clear. It's the developed nations in the West. Even though they're just a fraction of the world's population, their consumption habits are the main engine driving this thing. It's a massively oversized demand for the world's forest products.
And this just puts it in stark perspective. Let's just take one product, tissue paper. Look at these numbers from Statista. The average American, 25 kilograms a year. Western Europe, 17. Now compare that to Southeast Asia, just 4 kilograms. The scale of that difference is just staggering. And this gets us to a really tricky paradox. The whole push for sustainable packaging and fibers, which sounds great, right? Well, ironically, it's cranking up the pressure on the very same forests we say we want to protect. Okay, so we've established this massive, insatiable demand. But that supply has to come from somewhere. And that, my friends, brings us to the other side of this story, where the world's cellulose actually comes from and the immense human cost that's tied to it.
Just look at this number. It's from the World Bank, and it's almost hard to wrap your head around. 1.6 billion people. That's how many human beings, mostly in the tropical regions of the global south, depend directly on forests for their food, for their shelter, for their entire livelihood. Their lives are literally woven into the health of these ecosystems.
And here's where the problem gets really, really sharp. You've got this huge gap. On paper, you have official policies talking about sustainable harvesting, reforestation, community benefits. It all sounds great. But the on-the-ground reality, what World Bank reports call the shadow reality, is something else entirely. We're talking illegal logging, land grabs, corruption, and just really weak enforcement of any of the good rules.
So how bad is that shadow reality? Well, get this. According to the World Bank's Forest Governance Index, in some of the most important timber-producing regions in Southeast Asia, as much as 60% of the timber supply is at risk of being illegal. That's more than half. Okay, so you've got this massive risk baked into the supply chain. What does the West do? Well, they're responding, and their response is basically to build a fortress, a regulatory fortress. The whole goal here is to secure a clean supply chain. To shield themselves from all those risks of deforestation and illegality we just talked about, Western countries are putting up these strict new regulatory walls. And the biggest, most game-changing one of them all is the EUDR, the EU Deforestation Regulation. So how does this thing actually work? Well, it boils down to 3 really intense steps. First, trace. A company has to be able to trace its product all the way back to the exact plot of land it was grown on. We're talking GPS coordinates. Second, they have to prove that specific piece of land wasn't deforested after 2020. And third, they have to report all of this incredibly detailed due diligence to the EU authorities just to get their product in the door.
So on the surface, this sounds amazing, right? A totally secure, deforestation-free supply chain for Europe. But it begs a really important question. Who's actually paying for all of this? Who bears the massive cost of all this high-tech compliance?
And that one question, that's where everything comes together. It brings us right to our conclusion, where these two different worlds we've been talking about, the high-consumption, highly regulated West and the resource-rich but super vulnerable global South, they just collide head-on.
So here's the fundamental conflict laid bare. You've got Western consumers, and they are demanding, rightfully so, deforestation-free products. The response? These new laws, like the EUDR. But what these laws do is create this incredibly high-tech, super expensive barrier to entry. And for the small-scale farmers in the global South, the very people whose lives depend on these forests, they just don't have the resources to comply. It risks creating this two-tiered system, effectively locking the most vulnerable people out of the biggest markets.
And that leaves us with one final big question to chew on. As we're all trying to build this greener global economy, we really have to ask ourselves, is a green future truly sustainable if it isn't also fair for everyone involved? Thanks for joining us.